Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Amanda Rose, and today, before I get into the topic for this video, it is my duty to address what is happening in our country and what's happening in our cities. And as an educator, I just couldn't go forward and only talk about things that were pre-planned and not address what's happening. And so this entire video is not going to be about this. It's just to let everyone know that, you know, as human beings, it is our responsibility to talk about what's happening in our country, to talk about racism, to talk about injustice. And I just want to leave you guys with this message that, you know, individually we cannot change the world, but individually we can influence the people around us. And it is our responsibility to have conversations, courageous conversations, difficult conversations with the people around us, with our friends, with our family, with our co-workers, with our neighbors, to just educate ourselves on what is happening and why it's happening, and then to do something about it. And so please make sure that you approach every conversation, every engagement with love, that you do it from a place of compassion and understanding. My heart is that you guys just continue to approach these conversations with love, to minimize hate, and to do better, to know better. And so I'm going to be linking a bunch of websites in the description of a ton of webinars and websites that are right now talking about racial issues in our country, especially as educators, how we can engage in those conversations. And so I will leave those resources. It's not many, but it's more than nothing. And so I will leave those down below. And let's get into today's video. So I wanted to talk about my remote teaching reflection and strategies that I will be implementing in the future if this were to ever happen again. Hopefully not, but at this point, let's be prepared, right? So let's get into this. I have 3 actual areas of improvement and then about 2 to 3 strategies within each area of improvement. So let's get into this, my remote teaching reflection and practical strategies for the future. So my first area of improvement is continuing the community. I had a really difficult time continuing the sense of community amongst my students and letting them know that I'm here for them and allowing them to feel free to reach out whenever they wanted to engage, whether it be in conversation or to clarify any confusion. And I think that the minute that a face-to-face interaction and the teacher not being in front of the student to make the initiative to reach out really does break up the sense of community, because a lot of the responsibility is put on the students. And I think that that could be difficult for students, 1, depending on their age, 2, depending on their personality, and 3, depending on how they view you. You may think you have a great relationship with your students, but they know how they feel about you. And so them reaching out and them expressing concern or whatever the case may be may not always be the best thing, even though in our minds we're like, hey, if there's an issue, email me. If there's an issue, whatever. Sometimes kids just don't feel comfortable doing that. And so I think I learned that really quickly. And so here are some ways to continue the community and the sense of belonging in your classroom. First thing, incorporate polls and surveys. So I started using Google Forms, but this was more towards the middle of remote teaching. I definitely should have been doing this at least once a week or maybe every 2 weeks, but implementing polls and surveys through Google Forms so that students can answer, and then also sharing their responses, whether it be on the stream in Google Classroom or maybe a weekly Zoom where I shared responses. But really, 1, getting feedback, getting your students' voices heard so that you can learn how to improve. And then secondly, sharing those responses with students so that they can respond and interact in a different way. The second thing, consistent Zoom classes, even if it's once a week. I think in the beginning, everyone was frazzled, right? And we were just trying to pick up every piece that we felt was falling. But as I started to settle in, I realized how important Zoom classes are. Meeting face to face, even if your students don't show their face, hearing their voices, allowing them to see you, that continues to create community. It reminds them that you're an actual human being and you're not just someone talking behind a computer screen that they know nothing about. So making sure that you incorporate weekly Zoom classes at least, and you can also use those classes to talk about the polls or the surveys that you did allow students to fill out at some point in the week. Providing do now questions or questions that students can respond to on the actual stream of Google Classroom, making it a requirement that every student has to respond to someone. Very similar to like a Blackboard when we were in college. We've all experienced that, where you had to respond to at least 1 or 2 students. So making sure that you continue the community so that they can respond to each other, and it's not just a you to them. So much about the school community is them interacting with each other. And so that element really has to continue if at some point we do continue remote teaching when the new school year does continue. Number 2, clear and concise communication. I've always thought that I was someone that communicated very well. I think there are times that I can over communicate. You may notice that in some of my videos. But the level of confusion that occurred during remote teaching, and I understand it's because this was a platform that was very foreign and so different. However, I do think that there were areas that I could have improved on. So, 1, using Zoom classes to provide a verbal explanation of expectations, along with sharing my screen where I can have a slide of those expectations also visually provided to the students. And these were things that I did in the classroom, that you probably did in the classroom. I always had an agenda up, an update slide, an announcement slide, so the students could see it, they could take a picture of it if they wanted to, and also heard me verbally communicate it. Afterwards, you can also share that slide on Google Classroom, so the students on their own time have the opportunity to go and reread what it is that you mentioned verbally, visually, etc. To communicate clear behavioral and academic expectations. Again, this was slightly different because I don't think anyone really knew what to expect. No one really knew what we wanted from our teachers and what we wanted from our students. But again, moving forward, now we know better. So communicating clear expectations for students. My school did send out a document that we had to share with students and go over with them about Zoom class expectations and what they could do, what they couldn't do. All of that is so necessary so that you set the ground rules for what the class expectations are like. And again, we would do that in our classroom, so now how much more for this new platform. Third thing, providing virtual office hours. My school embedded into our schedule that we provide students with, office hours from 2 to 4 for students. But most of those office hours are just email. Like, hey, whenever there's a random question, whatever the case may be, here I am available for email. However, I think that if I would have provided at least from 2 to 3 Zoom office hours, and then maybe from 3 to 4, you can then email me, I think that would have helped clear up a lot of confusion with communication. I think some students just prefer to verbalize as opposed to send something through email. So I've realized that I only gave them one option, which is communicating through email, as opposed to saying, hey everyone, from 2 to 3, I'm going to be available on Zoom. You can log in if you want to. If you don't want to, totally okay. But here I am available for you if you have any questions. I think that even just allowing them to communicate verbally would have helped a lot of their anxiety and would have cleared up a lot of confusion. And I realized that way too late, that should have been an option. Number 3, student engagement. Probably the most difficult task was making sure that my students stayed engaged in learning online. And one of the biggest things I think needed to take place when this happened was connecting content to current events. And for myself, thankfully, I was teaching economics, or I still am because our school year is not over yet. And so a lot of what was happening is directly connected to economics. But again, with the fear and with everyone just concerned about their health in the future, and then still trying to figure out jobs and food and all of this that was happening, trying to then think of ways to connect current events was just very far from my mind, at least. But now that I've been able to reflect, I'm like, wow, that could have been so valuable. It probably would have eased tensions. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about how providing stimulus checks, how that affects the economy. Now, I actually have a lesson planned for Thursday where we're going to talk about how COVID and protesting and boycotting is affecting the economy, and what are the long-term effects, and why do people use these strategies? Why do people boycott businesses? What is the goal, and how does that affect the economy at large, but also those individual businesses? Economics is my content, and so it's so important to talk about these things, because the lessons that we talk about current events were the lessons that I had the most student engagement. It was so relevant. It was a lot easier to process, a lot easier to understand. I will say, not every lesson, personally, I think can be 100% connected to current events, but there's so much happening right now in the world that I feel like it's more than likely 9 out of 10 possible that you can make those connections from your content to real world current events right now. The next thing I would say for student engagement is being aware of your tone in emails and the way that you communicate to students. I realized that there were times where I was getting frustrated, or maybe I was learning about news about certain people in my family that were getting sick. And so it's really hard to block that stuff out and then respond to an email and make sure that you don't sound angry, or that you don't sound like you're being short. So making sure that you're aware of tone and the way that you communicate to students. Hi, how are you? It's good to hear from you. A lot of times it can just be like, yes, do this. No, do that. Hey, are you available? And your tone can actually deter students from wanting to continue to engage with you, and then also engage in the classroom. Next thing, again, using Google Classroom for student communication, using the stream so that you can post questions, even if it's just like one thing about, hey, what is your favorite thing about quarantine? What is your favorite thing? What do you miss most about being in the school building? And just having students respond, and then you can respond back, oh my God, yes, I miss saying good morning to you guys. I miss giving you a high five. Whatever the case may be, just taking a step away from content for a second and allowing them to be human beings. And it's interesting because in my classroom, these are things that I do all the time. Hey, good morning. How are you? How was your weekend? How are you feeling? Oh my God, did you see what's happening on the news? Do you know anyone that's protesting? If we were in the school building, these conversations would happen naturally. But I think because we are, again, online, through a computer screen, sometimes it takes us some time to process, like, oh, wait a second, those same things apply even on this forum. So definitely making sure that you still allow that space for just normal conversation to take place. And it's not just, hey, education, get the job done, we're learning, this is the curriculum, moving on. But creating this space for your students to talk and have conversation. So those are the 3 things that I have reflected on. 1, making sure that there is a sense of continuing the community within my classroom. 2, making sure that there is clear and concise communication. And 3, making sure that there continues to be student engagement. So hopefully these strategies are helpful for you. Maybe you've also realized the same things in your reflection of remote teaching, and we'll see what the future holds, but hopefully we can definitely have a better kickstart when we do go back to the next school year, because we have a better plan in place on how to approach the things that we have struggled with this school year. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Please make sure that you give it a thumbs up. Please make sure that you subscribe, and I'll continue to put out content for you guys. Please make sure that you stay safe, and I will see you all in the next video.